"Uncle, your secretary put something in your food," said the new janitor's daughter to the young millionaire. "Just before the story starts, wherever you are on your journey, consider this your sign to keep going." Marcus Richardson had everything a 32-year-old could want. The penthouse office on the 42nd floor of Richardson Industries overlooked Manhattan like a kingdom, and he was its undisputed king. $3 billion in net worth, a company built from his grandfather's small construction firm into a real estate empire that shaped skylines across America. But lately, something was wrong. "Mr. Richardson, your afternoon medications," Victoria Sterling announced, gliding into his office with her usual precision. His personal secretary of 5 years carried a silver tray with his daily supplements and a steaming cup of his favorite Colombian coffee. Marcus rubbed his temples, fighting another wave of dizziness. The headaches had started 3 months ago, along with periods of confusion that left him questioning his own decisions. His doctor said it was stress, prescribed more vitamins, more rest. But rest never came in his world. "Thank you, Victoria." He reached for the pills, noting how her manicured fingers lingered on the tray's edge. Something in her smile seemed different today, almost satisfied. "Uncle Marcus!" The tiny voice echoed from the hallway, followed by rapid footsteps. 4-year-old Emma burst through the office doors, her dark curls bouncing as she ran straight to his desk. Behind her, Maria Santos appeared, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry." "Mr. Richardson, she got away from me while I was cleaning the conference room," Maria apologized, her voice carrying a slight Puerto Rican accent. She'd been working as the night cleaning supervisor for only 2 weeks, but her daughter Emma had already charmed half the staff with her infectious giggle. "It's fine, Maria, really." Marcus found himself smiling genuinely for the first time all day. Emma had climbed onto his chair and was examining his pen collection with serious concentration. "Uncle, Uncle." Emma tugged on his sleeve, her big brown eyes suddenly serious. She glanced at Victoria, then whispered in that loud way children do when they think they're being secret. "Uncle, your secretary put something bad in your coffee. I saw her." The office fell silent. Victoria's face remained perfectly composed, but Marcus caught something, a flash of something dark in her eyes before her professional mask returned. "Children have such active imaginations, don't they?" But Emma shook her head vigorously. "No, I saw. She put white powder from a little bottle when you weren't looking. Mama says white powder in drinks is bad for people." Maria's face went pale. "Emma, we don't say things like that about—" "When did you see this, sweetheart?" Marcus interrupted, his voice gentle but his mind racing. The dizziness, the confusion, the memory lapses that had been getting worse each week. "Every day when you're not looking," Emma said matter-of-factly. "She hides the bottle in her desk. Mama, tell him about the white powder rule." Victoria stepped forward, her voice honey-sweet, but with an edge Marcus had never noticed before. "Mr. Richardson, surely you don't believe—" "What kind of bottle, Emma?" Marcus asked, his heart beginning to pound. Emma held up her tiny fingers, showing a small space. "This big, like Mama's medicine bottles, but she hides it when people come." Marcus looked at Victoria Sterling, beautiful, efficient Victoria, who had been by his side through every major business deal, who knew his schedule better than he did, who had access to everything in his life, who made his coffee every single day. The cup sat untouched on his desk, steam still rising from its surface. "Victoria," he said slowly, "I think we need to talk." But when he looked up, Victoria Sterling was already backing toward the door, her composure finally cracking, and in that moment, Marcus Richardson realized his 4-year-old guardian angel might have just saved his life. Victoria Sterling's heels clicked frantically against the marble floor as she rushed toward the elevator, her mind racing faster than her feet. Behind her, she could hear Marcus calling her name, but she didn't dare turn around. 5 years of careful planning. 5 years of slowly building trust while gradually weakening the most powerful man in New York, all destroyed by a 4-year-old with observant eyes. "Security! Stop, Ms. Sterling!" Marcus's voice echoed through the corridor. But Victoria had already reached the elevator. As the door slid shut, she caught a glimpse of Marcus standing in his doorway, little Emma still in his arms, both watching her with expressions she would never forget. The child's innocent face held no malice, just confusion at the chaos she'd unknowingly unleashed. 20 minutes later, Victoria sat in her Tesla in the parking garage, hands shaking as she dialed a number she'd hoped never to use. "It's compromised," she whispered when the voice answered. "The kid saw everything. Richardson knows." "How much time do we have?" The voice was cold, calculating. "Maybe hours. The blood tests will take time, but once they confirm what I've been giving him." Victoria's voice broke. "David, we need to execute the plan now, or we lose everything. Then we move tonight. You know what to do." Victoria stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. 5 years ago, she'd been David Sterling's wife, living a comfortable life until Marcus Richardson's corporate acquisition had destroyed her husband's family business. David had lost everything: his company, his father's legacy, even his will to live. The depression had consumed him, and their marriage had crumbled in the aftermath. But she had never forgotten who was responsible. Dr. Elizabeth Harper had been Marcus's personal physician for over a decade, but she'd never seen him look this determined or this worried. He sat in her private office at Mount Sinai, Emma coloring quietly in the corner, while Maria paced nervously near the window. "The blood work confirms it," Dr. Harper said, her face grave. "Scopolamine administered in small, regular doses over an extended period. It's often called devil's breath, causes memory loss, confusion, and makes victims highly susceptible to suggestion." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "How long?" "Based on the concentration levels, I'd estimate 3 to 4 months of consistent exposure. Mr. Richardson, this is attempted murder. The doses were carefully calculated to avoid immediate detection while gradually destroying your cognitive function." Maria turned from the window, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Emma mentioned the bad lady with the white powder weeks ago, but I thought it was just childhood imagination." "You saved my life," Marcus said firmly. "Both of you did." Dr. Harper leaned forward. "Marcus, we need to discuss the effects. Your recent business decisions, the contracts you've signed, the personal choices you've made, all of it could have been influenced by this drug. You weren't thinking clearly. The implications hit him like a physical blow. The merger with Coastal Development that had seemed so logical 3 weeks ago, the decision to liquidate his grandfather's original properties, the trust modifications he'd made, giving Victoria access to his personal accounts in case of medical emergency. She's been positioning herself to take control of everything, he realized. The board meetings I can barely remember, the documents I signed without really understanding them. His phone buzzed with an urgent message from his head of security. "Victoria Sterling accessed the main vault 30 minutes ago. She's taken documents related to Richardson Industries' ownership structure." Maria gasped. "What does that mean?" Marcus was already standing, his jaw set with determination. "It means she's not done, and neither am I." Marcus's private investigator, James Morrison, spread the files across the conference table like pieces of a complex puzzle. Maria sat beside Marcus, Emma sleeping peacefully on a couch nearby. It was past midnight, but none of them could rest until they understood the full scope of Victoria's deception. Victoria Sterling, maiden name Victoria Walsh, married to David Sterling in 2018, Morrison began. "Here's where it gets interesting. David Sterling was the owner of Sterling Construction, a third-generation family business. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Sterling Construction, we acquired them 4 years ago. Not acquired, Morrison corrected, destroyed. Your company identified their weakness during a bidding war for the Hudson Yards project. Sterling Construction had over-leveraged themselves on materials, and when Richardson Industries undercut their bid by 20%, they couldn't recover. The photographs showed a once thriving construction company reduced to bankruptcy. David Sterling's father, a man in his 70s, standing outside the family business he'd built over 5 decades, tears streaming down his face as foreclosure signs went up. David Sterling suffered a complete breakdown, Morrison continued. Depression, attempted suicide, divorce. Victoria blamed Richardson Industries for destroying her family. Maria's hand found Marcus's arm. She's been planning this for years. There's more, Morrison said grimly. David Sterling died by suicide 18 months ago. Left a note saying he couldn't live with the shame of losing his father's legacy. Victoria attended the funeral alone. Marcus stared at the photographs, seeing David Sterling's story through new eyes, a proud man who'd inherited his father's American dream, only to watch it crumble because Marcus had seen an opportunity and taken it. The guilt hit him like a physical weight. I remember that project now, Marcus whispered. We knew they were vulnerable. My advisors said it was just business, that someone would take them down eventually. I never thought about the people behind the company. Marcus. Maria said softly, what Victoria did was wrong, but I destroyed her life first, he finished. I may not have intended it personally, but the result was the same. Morrison cleared his throat. Sir, there's one more thing. According to our intelligence, Victoria hasn't been working alone. David Sterling had a brother, Michael, who's been funding this operation. He's a pharmaceutical chemist, and he's been supplying the scopolamine. Where are they now? Unknown, but they have copies of every document they need to challenge your ownership of Richardson Industries. With your cognitive state compromised over the past months, any decisions you made could be legally contested. Marcus looked at his sleeping angel, little Emma, who had saved him with her innocent observation, then at Maria, whose courage had given Emma's words the weight they deserved. He'd built an empire by being ruthless, by seeing opportunities and taking them regardless of the human cost. Maybe it was time to build something different. The boardroom of Richardson Industries had never hosted a meeting at 3 in the morning, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Marcus sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by his most trusted advisors and legal team. Maria remained close by with Emma, who had become an unofficial mascot of this bizarre crisis. The situation is complicated, lead counsel Richard Huang explained. Victoria Sterling has documentation suggesting you've been mentally compromised during several major business decisions. If she can prove cognitive impairment due to poisoning, she could argue that contracts signed during that period are invalid, including the trust modifications, CFO Sarah Chen added grimly. She currently has legal access to 70% of your liquid assets under the medical emergency clause you signed 6 weeks ago. Marcus felt the familiar rage building, but it was different now, cleaner, more focused. What's our strongest defense? The child, Huang said, gesturing toward Emma. Her testimony, combined with the medical evidence of deliberate poisoning, creates a clear case of criminal conspiracy. The question is whether we can prove it before they liquidate your accessible assets. Emma looked up from her coloring book. Are we talking about the bad lady again? Yes, sweetheart, Maria said gently. We're trying to make sure she can't hurt anyone else. She wasn't alone, Emma said matter-of-factly. There was a man who came to see her sometimes. He had the same nose as her. The room fell silent. Morrison leaned forward. Emma, can you tell us more about this man? He was sad, like my mama gets sometimes, and he brought her the white powder bottles. I saw him in the parking garage when Mama was cleaning the cars. Michael Sterling, Morrison confirmed. We need to find them both. Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed Victoria's number. Against his lawyer's advice, he answered on speaker. Marcus, Victoria's voice was calm, almost peaceful. I imagine you're quite busy tonight. Victoria, what you've done is criminal. Turn yourself in, and we can work something out. Her laugh was bitter. Work something out? Like you worked something out with my husband's family? Like you worked something out when you destroyed everything 3 generations of Sterlings had built? I know what happened to David. I'm sorry for your loss, but... Sorry? Her voice turned sharp. You're sorry? Do you know what it's like to watch someone you love lose the will to live? To see a proud man reduced to nothing because you wanted another trophy property? Marcus looked at Maria, seeing the pain in her eyes. She understood loss, understood what it meant to struggle to provide for a child. Victoria, what do you want? Justice. In 12 hours. I'll have transferred enough assets to fund a foundation in David's name, one that helps small businesses survive corporate predators like you. Consider it a very expensive lesson in empathy. The line went dead. Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve. Uncle Marcus, why is the sad lady so angry? How do you explain ruthless capitalism to a 4-year-old? How do you justify an empire built on the ruins of family dreams? Sometimes, Emma, grown-ups make mistakes that hurt other people, and sometimes the people who get hurt want to hurt back. But hurting back doesn't make the first hurt go away, Emma said with startling wisdom. Mama taught me that. Maria's eyes filled with tears as she realized her daughter had just summarized the entire tragedy in one innocent observation. The sun was rising over Manhattan when Marcus received the call that changed everything. Morrison's voice was urgent, breathless from running. We found them, but Marcus, you need to hear this. What is it? Victoria's not trying to steal your money. She's trying to give it away. Marcus felt the world shift beneath him. What do you mean? We traced the transfers. Every penny she's accessed is going to the David Sterling Memorial Foundation, a legitimate charity she established to help small businesses that have been displaced by corporate acquisitions. She's not keeping a dime. Maria looked up from where she was helping Emma with breakfast. She's not a thief, Morrison continued, and there's more. Michael Sterling, David's brother, he's not helping her for revenge. He's dying, Marcus, terminal cancer. He wanted to see his brother's memory honored before he goes. Where are they? The old Sterling construction warehouse in Queens, the one your company foreclosed on. She's been living there since David died, trying to figure out how to make this right. Marcus stared out at the city his family had helped build, seeing it through different eyes. 3 generations of Richardsons had created this empire by being stronger, faster, more ruthless than the competition. But what was the real cost of that success? Emma climbed onto his lap, her small hands framing his face. Uncle Marcus, are you sad like the lady now? A little, sweetheart. Mama says when people are sad, we should try to help them feel better. Maybe the sad lady just needs a friend. Maria's eyes met his over Emma's head. In them, he saw something he'd never experienced before, not admiration for his wealth or power, but compassion for the man behind the empire. She'd seen him at his most vulnerable, when he'd needed help most, and she'd stayed. Maria, he said quietly, what would you do if you were me? She was quiet for a long moment, considering. My grandmother always said that the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall down. They're the ones who know how to help others stand back up. Marcus looked at his reflection in the conference room window. He could see police cars surrounding the Sterling warehouse, could end this with Victoria and Michael in handcuffs. He could reclaim his assets, press charges, and return to business as usual, or he could do something his grandfather would never have understood. "Morrison," he said, "call off the police. I'm going to Queens." "Sir, that's not advisable." "I'm not going to arrest her," Marcus said, standing with Emma still in his arms. "I'm going to help her." The room erupted in protests from his legal team, but Marcus was already moving toward the door. Maria fell into step beside him, her hand finding his free one. "Are we going to help the sad lady?" Emma asked hopefully. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to try to make things right." As they left Richardson Industries together, the billionaire, the cleaning lady, and the little girl who had saved them all, Marcus realized that for the first time in his life, he was about to build something that couldn't be measured in dollars or market share. He was about to build redemption. The Sterling construction warehouse stood like a monument to broken dreams in the industrial section of Queens. Its faded blue paint peeled from weathered brick walls, and broken windows stared out like empty eyes. Marcus pulled his Bentley up to the chain-link fence, the luxury car looking absurdly out of place among the urban decay. "Are you sure about this?" Maria asked softly, adjusting Emma's seatbelt. The little girl had fallen asleep during the 40-minute drive from Manhattan, her face peaceful against the leather seat. Marcus stared at the building that had once housed 3 generations of Sterling family pride. "No, but that's never stopped me before." They walked through the rusted gate, Emma now awake and holding both their hands. The morning air carried the scent of industrial rust and something else, fresh coffee and the faint aroma of cleaning supplies. Someone was definitely living here. "Hello?" Marcus called out as they approached the main entrance. "Victoria, it's Marcus Richardson." The silence stretched for long moments before they heard footsteps echoing from within. The heavy door opened slowly, and Victoria Sterling appeared, looking nothing like the polished secretary who had worked by his side for 5 years. Her usually perfect hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she wore simple jeans and a flannel shirt. But her eyes, those same intelligent blue eyes, held a weariness that seemed to age her a decade. "I didn't expect you to come here," she said quietly, her gaze moving from Marcus to Maria and Emma. "Especially not with your family." "They're not my—" Marcus began, then stopped. Why was he correcting her? "We came to talk." Victoria stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. The warehouse had been transformed into a makeshift living space. One corner held a simple bed and a small kitchen setup. Another area was filled with filing cabinets, a desk, and dozens of boxes labeled with company names. But what dominated the space was a wall covered with photographs and documents, a shrine to Sterling Construction's history. Emma broke free from their hands and wandered toward the photo wall, her small fingers pointing at images of men in hard hats standing proudly beside construction sites. "Look, they're building things." "Yes, sweetheart," Victoria said, her voice catching slightly. "Those men built some of the most beautiful buildings in New York." Marcus approached the wall, studying the photographs with new eyes. He saw David Sterling at various ages, as a young man learning the trade from his father, as a new business owner full of hope, as a successful contractor celebrating completed projects. The final photos showed an older David, stress lines etched deep around his eyes, standing outside the warehouse with foreclosure notices visible in the background. "He was proud of his work," Marcus said softly. "He lived for it," Victoria replied. "His father, Thomas Sterling, started this company in 1962 with nothing but a pickup truck and a willingness to work 18-hour days. David grew up on construction sites, learned to read blueprints before he could properly read books. This wasn't just a business to them, it was their legacy." Maria moved closer to examine the photographs. "My father was a carpenter in Puerto Rico," she said quietly. "I understand what it means when your work is your identity." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "When the Hudson Yards project fell through, It wasn't just about the money. It was about watching everything his father and grandfather had built disappear. David felt like he'd failed 3 generations of his family. "Uncle Marcus," Emma called from across the warehouse, "why is that man crying in the picture?" They turned to see Emma pointing at a photograph they hadn't noticed. David Sterling on the day of the foreclosure. His face a mask of devastation as workers removed equipment from the warehouse. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. "Because he lost something very important to him, Emma." A new voice spoke from the shadows. "He lost everything." They turned to see Michael Sterling emerge from behind a stack of boxes. He was thin, almost gaunt, with the pale complexion of someone fighting a serious illness, but his eyes held the same determination Marcus had seen in Victoria. "You must be Michael," Marcus said, extending his hand. "I'm sorry about your brother." Michael ignored the offered handshake. Are you sorry you got caught?" The tension in the warehouse was palpable. Emma moved instinctively closer to Maria, sensing the adult emotions she couldn't fully understand. "Both," Marcus answered honestly. "I won't insult you by saying I never intended for this to happen. I knew exactly what we were doing when we undercut your bid. I just never thought about the people behind the company we were destroying." "Convenient," Michael said bitterly. "It's easier to compete when you don't think about the casualties." Victoria placed a hand on her brother-in-law's arm. "Michael, please, let him speak." Marcus looked around the warehouse, seeing not just the physical space, but the weight of history it contained. "I came here to ask what I can do to make this right, but standing here now, I realize that nothing I do can bring David back or undo the pain we caused." "No," Victoria agreed, "it can't, but it might prevent it from happening to someone else." "The foundation," Marcus said. "Tell me about it." Victoria moved to her desk and retrieved a thick folder. "The David Sterling Memorial Foundation for Small Business Protection. We've identified 47 small businesses currently at risk of being displaced by larger corporations. We provide emergency funding, legal assistance, and business consulting to help them survive." She handed him the folder, and Marcus began reading. The documentation was meticulous, professional, and heartbreaking. Family businesses that had operated for decades, suddenly facing extinction because they couldn't compete with larger companies willing to operate at a loss until the competition disappeared. "How much have you transferred from my accounts?" Marcus asked. 12 million so far," Victoria said without shame. "We need at least 50 million to make a real impact." Maria gasped at the numbers, but Marcus barely reacted. 50 million was less than he spent on art acquisitions in a typical year. "Uncle Marcus," Emma said, tugging on his jacket, "are you going to help the sad lady fix the broken buildings out of the mouths of babes?" Marcus knelt down to Emma's level. "What do you think I should do, sweetheart?" Emma looked seriously around the warehouse, then at the photographs on the wall. "The broken building men look like my mama when she's worried about paying for things. Maybe you could help them not be worried anymore." Marcus stood and looked at Victoria and Michael, both watching him with expressions somewhere between hope and resignation. "I'll give you the 50 million, he said quietly. Victoria's eyes widened. "What?" "I'll give you the 50 million for the foundation, but I have conditions." Michael stepped forward aggressively. "You're not in a position to make conditions." "I want to be involved," Marcus continued. "Not in control, but involved. I want to learn how to do business differently, and I want the foundation to be permanent. Not just a one-time gesture." Victoria stared at him for a long moment. "Why?" Marcus looked at Maria, who was watching him with an expression he'd never seen before, not admiration for his wealth, but respect for his choice. He looked at Emma, whose innocent wisdom had started this entire journey. Then he looked back at the wall of photographs, at the faces of proud men who had built dreams with their hands. "Because a 4-year-old just taught me that helping people feel better is more important than being right," he said. And because for the first time in my life, I want to build something that honors people instead of burying them. Victoria's tough facade finally cracked, and tears began streaming down her face. Michael's hostility wavered, replaced by something that might have been hope. But Marcus wasn't finished. There's one more thing. I want to rebuild Sterling Construction. The warehouse fell completely silent except for the sound of Victoria's quiet sobbing. Chapter 8. The Proposal. The silence in the warehouse stretched like a held breath. Victoria stared at Marcus as if he'd spoken in a foreign language, her tears still fresh on her cheeks. Michael's face had gone completely pale, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. "Rebuild Sterling Construction," Victoria whispered. That's impossible." Emma, oblivious to the weight of the moment, had wandered back to the photo wall and was tracing her small finger along the image of a completed skyscraper. "This one's pretty," she announced. "Did the sad man's family build this?" "Yes, sweetheart," Maria answered softly, her own voice thick with emotion. "They built many beautiful things." Marcus moved closer to Victoria, his voice steady but gentle. "It's not impossible. Difficult, yes, but not impossible." Michael finally found his voice. "Why would you want to rebuild the company you destroyed?" "Because destruction is easy," Marcus replied. Looking around the warehouse that had become both a tomb and a shrine. "Any fool with enough money can tear something down. But creation, building something that lasts, something that employs people and gives families hope, that takes real skill." Victoria shook her head, still struggling to process his words. "Marcus, you don't understand. It's not just about money. The Sterling name in construction is finished. After what happened, no one would trust us with their projects." "They would trust Richardson Industries," Marcus said quietly. "And Richardson Industries would be partnering with Sterling Construction." Maria stepped forward, Emma's hand in hers. "Mr. Richardson, forgive me for asking, but is this really what you want? Or is this guilt talking?" Marcus turned to face her, struck by her directness. In the early morning light filtering through the warehouse windows, Maria looked different somehow. Stronger, more confident than the nervous cleaning lady who had apologized for her daughter's interruption just hours ago. "Both," he admitted. "I am guilty of destroying lives without thinking about the consequences. But I also recognize something valuable when I see it." He gestured toward the photo wall. "Look at the craftsmanship in those buildings. Look at the pride in those men's faces. That's not something you can buy or manufacture. That's legacy." Michael began coughing, a harsh sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. Victoria immediately moved to his side, supporting him as the coughing fit subsided. "The cancer's getting worse," she explained to Marcus. "He doesn't have much time." "Then we don't have time to waste," Marcus said firmly. "Michael, what would David have wanted? For his family's work to stay buried or for it to rise again?" Michael wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, his breathing labored. "David would have wanted—" He paused, gathering strength. "He would have wanted the Sterling name to mean something again." Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve. "Miss Victoria, why don't you smile in any of these pictures?" Victoria knelt down to Emma's level. "Because I've been very sad for a very long time, little one. But Uncle Marcus wants to help fix things now," Emma said with the simple logic of childhood. "Maybe you can smile again when things get fixed." Victoria's eyes met Marcus's over Emma's head. "It would have to be done right. No cutting corners, no exploiting workers, no undercutting honest competitors." "Agreed," Marcus said without hesitation. "And the foundation remains fully funded and independent." "Of course." Michael struggled to his feet, his jaw set with determination despite his obvious weakness. "And I want to be involved. Whatever time I have left, I want to spend it seeing my brother's company live again." Marcus nodded. "We'll need your expertise, all of our expertise." Maria had been quietly observing the exchange, but now she spoke up. What about the people who worked for Sterling Construction, the ones who lost their jobs when the company closed? Victoria's face lit up for the first time. Thomas Brennan, our old foreman. Sarah Martinez, our best project manager. Most of them never found work that matched their skills. They've been struggling for years. Then there'll be our first calls, Marcus said. We rebuild Sterling Construction with Sterling people. Emma clapped her hands together. Are we going to build pretty buildings like in the pictures? Yes, sweetheart, Marcus said, surprising himself with the warmth in his voice. We're going to build beautiful things. He looked around the group. Victoria with her tear-stained face beginning to show hope. Michael fighting his illness to see his family's legacy restored. Maria watching him with something that might have been admiration. And Emma, whose innocent observation had started this entire transformation. There's just one more thing, Marcus added. I'd like Maria to consider joining us as well. Maria's eyes widened. Me? But You're not just anything, Marcus interrupted. You're the person who raised a daughter wise enough to save my life. You're someone who understands what it means to work hard for your family. We're going to need people we can trust. Emma bounced excitedly. Mama, we can help build pretty buildings. For the first time since entering the warehouse, Victoria Sterling smiled, really smiled. Welcome to Sterling Construction, Emma, our youngest consultant. As morning light continued to stream through the warehouse windows, Marcus Richardson realized he was about to embark on the most challenging project of his life. And for the first time, the challenge had nothing to do with profit margins or market dominance. It had everything to do with redemption. 3 weeks later, the Sterling Construction warehouse buzzed with activity that hadn't been seen in 4 years. Contractors moved equipment, architects spread blueprints across newly installed tables, and the sound of hammers echoed through the space as they converted the old warehouse into a functional headquarters. Marcus stood in what would become the main office, watching Maria coordinate the installation of new computers with the patience of someone accustomed to managing chaos. Emma sat at a child-sized desk they'd brought in, seriously coloring what she called building plans, though they looked more like rainbows and flowers. The permit office approved our application, Victoria announced, entering with a stack of official documents. Her transformation over the past weeks had been remarkable. The grief-stricken woman had been replaced by someone who moved with renewed purpose, her eyes bright with possibility. All of them? Marcus asked, surprised. Municipal permits usually took months. Victoria's smile was sly. Apparently, when Richardson Industries co-signs an application, bureaucratic wheels turn much faster. Michael emerged from the back office, moving slowly but with determination. The chemotherapy treatments were taking their toll, but he insisted on coming in every day. Thomas Brennan and Sarah Martinez both accepted our offers. They'll start Monday. What about the others? Marcus asked. Most of the old crew wants to come back, Michael continued. But Marcus, they're scared. They need to know this isn't just some publicity stunt that'll disappear when you get bored. The concern was valid. Marcus had a reputation for acquiring companies, optimizing them, and moving on. But as he watched Emma carefully color inside the lines of her drawing, he realized this felt different from any business venture he'd ever undertaken. "Uncle Marcus," Emma called out, "can you help me spell family?" As he knelt beside her desk, showing her the letters, Maria approached with 2 cups of coffee. "The real test will be our first project," she said quietly. Victoria found a potential client. "Already?" Victoria joined them, her enthusiasm evident. "The Riverside Community Center in the Bronx. They need a new building after the old one was damaged in a fire. It's not glamorous and the budget is tight, but it's exactly what Sterling Construction was built for," Marcus finished. "Community projects that bigger companies ignore because the profit margins are too small." The board of Richardson Industries won't understand, Maria said carefully, taking on small projects with minimal returns. Marcus looked around the warehouse, seeing not just the physical space, but what it represented. Let them complain. This isn't about Richardson Industries' quarterly reports. This is about proving that business can be about more than just profit. Emma held up her drawing, a colorful building with stick figures holding hands around it. Look, it's the happy building we're going to make. Victoria knelt down to examine Emma's artwork. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that all of us in the picture? Emma pointed to each figure. That's Uncle Marcus, that's Mama, that's Miss Victoria, that's Mr. Michael, and that's me. We're all holding hands because we're a family now. The adults exchanged glances over Emma's head. The word family hung in the air, weighted with possibility and uncertainty. Michael began coughing again, and Victoria immediately went to his side. When the fit passed, he looked at Marcus with eyes that held both gratitude and urgency. I want to see the first building completed, he said quietly. I want to know that David's name will be on something beautiful again before I... You will, Marcus promised. We all will. Maria's phone rang, interrupting the moment. Her face grew serious as she listened. That was the community center, she said after hanging up. They have 3 other companies bidding on the project, all with lower estimates than ours. Victoria's face fell. We can't compete on price if we're paying fair wages and using quality materials. Then we don't compete on price, Marcus said firmly. We compete on something else. What? Michael asked. Marcus picked up Emma's drawing, studying the happy figures holding hands around their colorful building. We compete on caring. We show them what it means when a company actually invests in the community instead of just taking from it. Emma bounced in her chair. Are we going to go meet the people who want the happy building? Yes, we are, Marcus said, surprising everyone, including himself. All of us. Tomorrow. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You want to bring a 4-year-old to a business presentation? I want to bring the person who reminded us what really matters, Marcus replied. Besides, who better to explain what a community center should feel like than someone who actually represents the community? As they continued planning for the next day's presentation, Marcus caught Maria watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, she smiled, not the polite smile of an employee, but something warmer, more personal. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Richardson was building something that couldn't be measured in dollars or market share. He was building relationships, trust, and maybe even something that resembled the family Emma had drawn in her picture. The real question was whether he was strong enough to protect it when the inevitable challenges came. The Riverside Community Center board meeting took place in a cramped room that smelled of coffee and hope. Marcus had never been in a space where folding chairs outnumbered leather ones, where the biggest luxury was a working air conditioner that wheezed in the corner. Emma sat between Marcus and Maria, swinging her legs and clutching her drawing of the happy building. Victoria and Michael flanked them, looking nervous but determined. Across the table sat 3 board members who looked like they'd been fighting for their community's survival for decades. Before we begin, said Mrs. Rodriguez, the board chairwoman, I have to ask, why is Richardson Industries interested in our little project? Marcus started to give his prepared corporate response, but Emma tugged his sleeve. Tell them about the family, she whispered loudly. The room fell silent. Marcus looked at the expectant faces around the table, then at Emma's earnest expression. Corporate presentations suddenly seemed inadequate. Because a very wise 4-year-old taught me that building something beautiful is more important than building something profitable, he said simply. Emma beamed and held up her drawing. We're going to make a place where kids can play and families can be happy together. Mrs. Rodriguez's stern expression softened as she examined Emma's colorful artwork. And how is this different from the other companies who've presented? Victoria leaned forward. We're not just building a structure, we're rebuilding Sterling Construction, a company that was destroyed 4 years ago. This project represents our commitment to community-focused construction. Sterling Construction? Board member James Walsh looked up sharply. I remember that company. Good reputation before they went under. Michael, despite his obvious fatigue, spoke with passion about their vision. Fair wages for workers, quality materials, and long-term community partnerships rather than one-time contracts. Mrs. Rodriguez was nodding when Marcus's phone buzzed with an urgent message, then another, and another. Mr. Richardson, Victoria whispered, your board is calling an emergency meeting right now. Marcus's blood ran cold. Tell them I'm unavailable. They're threatening to invoke the competency clause, she continued quietly. Something about recent erratic behavior and unauthorized fund transfers. Maria caught the exchange. What does that mean? Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang. He recognized the number, Richard Blackstone, chairman of Richardson Industries Board of Directors. I have to take this, Marcus apologized to the community board. It'll just be a moment. He stepped outside, but Emma had followed him, her small hand slipping into his. Marcus! Blackstone's voice was ice cold. What the hell do you think you're doing? I'm in a business meeting, Richard. Can this wait? You transferred $50 million to some charity without board approval. You're pursuing low-profit construction projects that will tank our quarterly numbers. And according to medical records we've obtained, you were recently treated for drug poisoning that affected your cognitive function. Marcus felt the world shifting beneath his feet. How did you get my medical records? That's irrelevant. What matters is that the board has lost confidence in your leadership. You have two choices. Abandon this Sterling Construction nonsense and return to profitable business practices, or we'll have you declared mentally incompetent to run the company. Emma tugged on his jacket. Uncle Marcus, why do you look scared? The question hit him like a physical blow. When had he started being scared of his own board? When had building something meaningful become a threat to his authority? I'm not scared, sweetheart, he said, his voice growing stronger. I'm just deciding what's really important. Into the phone, he said, Richard, I've made my choice. Richardson Industries will support Sterling Construction, or you can find yourself a new CEO. You're making a mistake, Marcus. We'll convene the board tonight. By tomorrow morning, you'll be out. Then I guess I have until tomorrow morning to prove you wrong. Marcus hung up and knelt down to Emma's level. Sweetheart, remember when you told me about the white powder in my coffee? Emma nodded seriously. Well, sometimes grown-ups try to use different kinds of poison to hurt people. They try to make you scared of doing good things. But you're not going to let them, right? Marcus looked through the window at Maria, Victoria, and Michael, sitting with the community board members, all of them believing in something bigger than profit margins. No, Emma. I'm not going to let them. They returned to the meeting where Victoria was explaining their timeline. Marcus sat down, his mind racing but his resolve crystallizing. Mrs. Rodriguez, he interrupted, I need to tell you something. In approximately 18 hours, I may no longer have access to Richardson Industries resources. But Sterling Construction will build your community center regardless. The room buzzed with confused murmurs. Maria's eyes widened with concern. What are you saying? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Marcus looked at his unlikely family, the woman he was falling in love with, the child who had saved his life, the grief-stricken secretary who had become his partner in redemption, and the dying man fighting to restore his brother's legacy. I'm saying that some things are worth more than corporate approval. Sterling Construction isn't just rebuilding a company. We're rebuilding what it means to do business with integrity. Emma stood up on her chair and clapped. We're going to build the happy building no matter what. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, the first genuine smile of the meeting. Then, welcome to the Riverside community, Sterling Construction. As they shook hands, Marcus realized he had less than 24 hours to save everything he'd just promised to build. The real battle was just beginning. The Richardson Industries boardroom had never felt more like a courtroom. Marcus sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, facing 12 board members, whose expressions ranged from disappointed to openly hostile. Behind him, Maria held Emma's hand, while Victoria and Michael stood as unlikely witnesses to what might be the end of his corporate empire. "This is highly irregular," board member Patricia Wells complained, gesturing toward Emma, who was quietly coloring another building picture. "Children don't belong in board meetings." "This child saved my life," Marcus replied firmly. "She belongs wherever I need her to be." Richard Blackstone spread medical documents across the table like evidence in a murder trial. "These records show cognitive impairment due to systematic poisoning. Every major decision Marcus has made in the past 3 months is suspect." Victoria stepped forward, her voice steady despite the room's hostile atmosphere. "I administered that poison, and I can testify that Mr. Richardson's recent decisions show improved judgment, not impaired thinking." "Improved?" Blackstone laughed harshly. "He's given away $50 million to charity and committed Richardson Industries to unprofitable construction projects." Emma looked up from her drawing. "Why is the angry man yelling about helping people?" The innocent question hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of treating charity and community service as evidence of mental incompetence. Marcus stood slowly, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. "For 32 years, I've run this company the way my grandfather taught me, by being stronger, faster, and more ruthless than the competition. And yes, we've been profitable." He gestured toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. "We've built an empire by stepping on anyone who got in our way. We've destroyed family businesses, displaced communities, and measured success solely by quarterly profits." "And we've been incredibly successful," Blackstone interjected. "Have we?" Marcus asked. "Because sitting in a warehouse 3 weeks ago, looking at photographs of a man who killed himself because we destroyed his family's legacy, I realized something. Success that comes from destroying others isn't success at all. It's just expensive loneliness." Maria squeezed Emma's hand, tears forming in her eyes as she watched Marcus fight for everything they'd begun to build together. Michael, weak but determined, spoke from his chair. "I'm dying. I have maybe 6 months left, and I want to spend that time watching my brother's company rise again, not planning revenge against corporations that treat people like obstacles." "No, this is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation we're talking about," Blackstone said coldly. "Marcus, you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," Marcus replied. "Victoria, show them the contracts." Victoria spread new documents across the table. "Sterling Construction has secured 12 projects in the past 2 weeks. Community centers, affordable housing, small business developments. The profit margins are smaller, but the social impact is enormous." "Social impact doesn't pay dividends," board member Harrison Jones muttered. Emma stood up on her chair, her small voice cutting through the adult arguments. "My mama says that when you help people, they help you back. That's how families work." She walked to the head of the table and handed Marcus her latest drawing. A picture of Richardson Industries and Sterling Construction buildings side by side, with stick figures holding hands between them. "Maybe the angry people just forgot how to be in a family," she said seriously. The room fell silent. Even Blackstone seemed momentarily speechless. Marcus looked at the drawing, then at the faces around the table. "I'm not asking you to approve of my choices. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Richardson Industries will continue operating profitably, but we'll also support projects that benefit communities rather than just shareholders. And if we vote to remove you, Blackstone challenged. Marcus looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. At Victoria, who had risked everything to find redemption. At Michael, fighting terminal cancer to restore his family's honor. At Emma, whose innocent wisdom had started this entire transformation. Then you'll remove someone who finally understands what it means to build something that lasts, Marcus said. But Sterling Construction will continue with or without Richardson Industries. Because some things are more important than corporate approval. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document that made several board members gasp. I'm prepared to resign as CEO of Richardson Industries effective immediately. Victoria Sterling will receive my shares in the company as compensation for the years of systematic poisoning she endured while working here. Marcus, no, Victoria whispered. That's not what we wanted. It's what needs to happen, Marcus replied. Because I'd rather lose a company than lose the people who taught me how to be human again. Emma climbed onto his lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Uncle Marcus, are the angry people going to make you go away? Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Blackstone stared at the resignation document, clearly not expecting this move. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were about to inherit a public relations nightmare if word got out that they'd forced out a CEO for being too charitable. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning, Blackstone said finally. Marcus, I suggest you reconsider this dramatic gesture. As the board members filed out, leaving Marcus alone with his chosen family, Emma looked up at him with serious eyes. Uncle Marcus, tomorrow is when we find out if love wins, right? Marcus hugged her tighter, realizing that a 4-year-old had just summarized the entire crisis perfectly. Tomorrow, they would indeed find out if love could triumph over greed. The morning sun painted Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and possibility, as Marcus stood in the Sterling Construction warehouse, watching his unlikely family prepare for what could be their last day together. Emma sat at her small desk, carefully putting the finishing touches on a new drawing, while Maria and Victoria reviewed contracts with the quiet intensity of generals planning a final battle. Michael rested in a chair nearby, his breathing labored, but his eyes bright with determination. The chemotherapy had weakened his body, but his spirit remained unbroken as he watched the company his brother had loved come back to life. The board meeting is in 2 hours, Victoria announced, checking her watch. Are you sure about this, Marcus? Before he could answer, Emma jumped down from her chair and ran to him, holding up her latest masterpiece. This drawing was different from her others. More detailed, more purposeful. It showed a tall building with Sterling written in careful 4-year-old letters across the front, surrounded by smaller buildings labeled Community Center, School, and Happy Homes. At the bottom, stick figures held hands in a long chain that wrapped around all the buildings. This is what we're building, Uncle Marcus, she said seriously. Not just one building, but a whole happy place where families can live and work and be together. Marcus knelt down to study the drawing more carefully, and as he did, he realized Emma had captured something he'd been struggling to articulate. This wasn't just about rebuilding Sterling Construction or saving his relationship with the board. This was about creating a model for how business could serve communities instead of exploiting them. Emma, he said softly, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what we're building. Maria joined them, placing a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. Over the past weeks, their relationship had evolved from employer and employee to something neither of them had dared to name. She'd watched him transform from a ruthless corporate raider into a man who cared more about Emma's drawings than quarterly profit reports. Whatever happens today, Maria said quietly, you've already won the most important battle. What do you mean? "You've become the kind of man Emma can look up to," she replied. "The kind of man who builds things instead of tearing them down." Their eyes met, and in that moment Marcus felt something he'd never experienced in all his years of corporate success. Complete contentment. Not the rush of closing a billion-dollar deal or the satisfaction of defeating a competitor, but the deep, quiet peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. "Maria," he began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he wanted to say. "I know," she whispered, her smile answering the question he hadn't yet found the courage to ask. Victoria cleared her throat diplomatically. "I hate to interrupt, but we have visitors." Through the warehouse windows, they could see a convoy of black cars pulling up outside. Marcus's stomach dropped, assuming it was the board arriving early to deliver bad news. But as the car doors opened, familiar faces emerged. Faces that brought smiles to Victoria's eyes and tears to Michael's. "Thomas!" Victoria called out as a burly man with silver hair and calloused hands entered the warehouse. "Sarah, everyone!" One by one, former Sterling construction employees filed into the space, their faces showing a mixture of hope and disbelief. These were the men and women who had built New York's skyline with their hands, who had lost their livelihoods when the company folded, who had struggled for 4 years to find work that matched their skills and pride. Thomas Brennan, the former foreman, approached Marcus with the direct gaze of a man who'd never learned to be intimidated by wealth or power. "Mr. Richardson, Victoria called us about the board meeting today. We wanted to be here. We heard what you're trying to do," added Sarah Martinez, the former project manager. "Bringing Sterling back, doing right by the community. We wanted you to know that if you need us, we're ready to work." Marcus looked around at the dozen workers who had come to support a company that had once abandoned them, and he felt humbled by their faith in second chances. "I don't know what's going to happen today," he admitted. "The board may shut this down before it really begins. Then we'll find another way," Thomas said firmly. "Sterling Construction isn't just a name on a building. It's an idea about how construction should be done, with pride, with integrity, with respect for the people who live in the buildings we create." Emma had been listening to the adult conversation with the serious attention she gave to everything important. Now she tugged on Thomas's work shirt to get his attention. "Mr. Thomas, are you going to help us build the happy buildings?" Thomas knelt down to her level, his weathered face breaking into a gentle smile. "If your Uncle Marcus will have us, little lady, we'd be honored to build happy buildings with you." "Good," Emma said decisively, "because Mama says the best things are built by families working together." As if summoned by Emma's words about family, more cars began arriving outside the warehouse. These vehicles were different, not the corporate luxury of board members, but the modest sedans and SUVs of ordinary people. Marcus watched in amazement as residents from the Riverside community began filing into the warehouse. Mrs. Rodriguez led the group, carrying a folder of documents and wearing the determined expression of someone who'd spent decades fighting for her neighborhood. Behind her came families with children, elderly residents who remembered when community mattered more than profit, and young adults who still believed in the possibility of positive change. "Mr. Richardson," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, "we heard about your board meeting today. We came to show our support for Sterling Construction." "How did you know about the meeting?" Emma raised her small hand proudly. "I told them. When we visited yesterday, I said the angry people might try to stop us from building happy buildings." Mrs. Rodriguez said the community should help protect good people. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the show of support, but also concerned about the implications. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I appreciate this more than I can say, but corporate board meetings aren't really open to the public?" she interrupted with a knowing smile. Actually, according to New York corporate law, when a company's activities significantly impact a community, affected residents have the right to attend board meetings as observers. Victoria's eyes widened. How did you know that? Because I've been fighting corporate interests in this community for 25 years, Mrs. Rodriguez replied. I know every law, every regulation, every loophole that gives ordinary people a voice in decisions that affect their lives. One of the younger community members, a woman named Carmen, who worked at the local school, stepped forward. Mr. Richardson, Sterling Construction isn't just promising us a building, you're promising us hope. You're showing our children that businesses can care about more than just profit. As more community members arrived, the warehouse began to feel like a town hall meeting. Children played while adults discussed construction timelines. Elderly residents shared stories about the old Sterling Construction, and teenagers asked questions about job opportunities in the building trades. Emma moved through the crowd like a tiny ambassador, showing her drawings to anyone who would look and explaining her vision of happy buildings where families can be together. Marcus watched her with wonder, realizing that his 4-year-old guardian angel had somehow become the spiritual center of a movement that was much bigger than any of them had imagined. "Uncle Marcus," Emma said, appearing at his side with her hand clasped in that of an elderly man Marcus didn't recognize. "This is Mr. Sterling. He wanted to meet you." Marcus's breath caught as he looked into eyes that reminded him unmistakably of David Sterling. The man was in his 80s, with silver hair and hands that showed a lifetime of hard work. Thomas Sterling Sr. The man introduced himself with quiet dignity. "David was my son." The warehouse fell silent as the gravity of the moment settled over everyone present. This was the patriarch of Sterling Construction, the man who had built the company from nothing, who had watched his life's work crumble and his son die from the shame of losing the family legacy. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus began, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm so sorry for what my company did to yours. I know nothing I can say or do will bring David back, but—" "Stop," Thomas Sr. said gently, placing a weathered hand on Marcus's arm. "I didn't come here for apologies, son. I came to say thank you." "Thank you?" The old man's eyes filled with tears, but his voice remained steady. "For 4 years, I've watched my family name become a symbol of failure in this city. Every day I've driven past buildings we used to be proud of, knowing that people would look at them and remember the company that couldn't survive." He gestured around the warehouse, taking in the activity, the hope, the sense of purpose that filled the space. "But today, I see Sterling Construction alive again. Not just the name, but the spirit, the commitment to building communities, not just structures." Emma tugged on the old man's sleeve. "Mr. Sterling, are you David's daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart, I am." "Then you're going to be so proud when you see the happy buildings we make with his name on them," Emma said with absolute confidence. "Uncle Marcus says we're going to build things that make people smile, just like David used to do." Thomas Sr. knelt down with some difficulty, bringing himself to Emma's eye level. "Little one, you've given an old man the greatest gift imaginable, hope that his son's name will be remembered for something beautiful again." As Marcus watched this exchange, he felt the final pieces of his transformation clicking into place. This wasn't about corporate redemption or public relations. This was about honoring the memory of a good man who had died believing he was a failure, and ensuring that his family's legacy would represent the very best of what American business could be. The sound of expensive car engines interrupted the warehouse gathering. Through the windows, they could see the familiar black sedans of Richardson Industries, board members pulling up outside. "They're here," Victoria announced unnecessarily. Marcus looked around at the assembled crowd. Former Sterling employees ready to work again, community members fighting for their neighborhood's future, an elderly man hoping to see his son's name redeemed, and the woman and child who had taught him what really mattered in life. "Are you ready for this?" Maria asked, taking his hand. "No," Marcus admitted, "but I'm ready to do what's right, regardless of the consequences." Emma had positioned herself at Marcus's other side, her small hand finding his. "Uncle Marcus, remember what Mama taught me about bullies?" "What's that, sweetheart?" "Bullies are just scared people who forgot how to be nice. Sometimes you have to be extra brave to help them remember." As the board members entered the warehouse, their expressions shifting from annoyance to confusion to outright alarm at the crowd of ordinary citizens waiting for them, Marcus realized that Emma had once again provided the perfect wisdom for the moment. Richard Blackstone led the corporate delegation, his usual composed demeanor cracking as he took in the scene. "Marcus, what is the meaning of this gathering?" "This," Marcus replied, gesturing to encompass everyone in the warehouse, "is what Sterling Construction represents. These are the people we build for, work with, and answer to." "This is a private corporate matter," board member Patricia Wells protested. "These people have no business." "Actually, we do." Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted politely but firmly. "Sterling Construction's activities directly impact our community. Under New York corporate law, we have the right to observe proceedings that affect our neighborhood's development." Blackstone's eyes narrowed as he realized they were dealing with more than emotional appeals and corporate charity. This was organized community activism backed by legal authority. "Very well," he said through gritted teeth, "but this changes nothing about the board's concerns regarding Marcus's competency and judgment." Thomas Brennan stepped forward, his foreman's instincts taking over. "With respect, sir, I've worked with Mr. Richardson for the past 3 weeks. I've seen his decision-making, his attention to detail, his commitment to quality work. If that's incompetent, then I don't understand the meaning of the word." "He's planning projects with minimal profit margins," board member Harrison Jones argued. "That's not fiscally responsible." "Minimal but consistent," Sarah Martinez corrected, producing a folder of financial projections. "Sterling Construction's business model shows steady long-term growth through community partnerships and repeat clients. We're building relationships, not just buildings." Emma had been listening to the adult argument with growing frustration. Finally, she marched to the center of the warehouse and climbed onto a chair so everyone could see her. "Excuse me," she announced in her clear 4-year-old voice. "I have something important to say." The warehouse fell silent, all eyes on the tiny figure who had somehow become the heart of this unlikely revolution. "Uncle Marcus used to be sick because the bad lady put poison in his coffee," Emma began, her childish directness cutting through corporate euphemisms. "But now he's better, and he wants to build happy places for families." She held up her latest drawing, showing it to the board members. "These angry people think making money is more important than making people happy. But my mama taught me that when you help people, they help you back. That's how you build a real family." Emma pointed directly at Blackstone. "You look like you forgot how to be happy, mister. Maybe if you helped build something good, you'd remember how to smile." Several community members chuckled, and even some of the board members seemed taken aback by the child's directness. Blackstone, however, was not amused. "This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation we're talking about. Using a child to—" "Nobody's using me," Emma interrupted indignantly. "I'm helping because Uncle Marcus and Mama and Miss Victoria are my family now, and families help each other." The simple honesty of her statement seemed to shift something in the warehouse's atmosphere. Marcus watched as board members who had entered with hostile determination began to look uncomfortable, as if they were realizing that their corporate power plays looked petty and cruel when viewed through the eyes of a child who simply wanted to help build something beautiful. Michael Sterling, who had been conserving his strength for this moment, slowly stood up from his chair. Despite his obvious weakness, his voice carried clearly through the warehouse. "I'm dying," he said without preamble. "I have maybe 6 months left, maybe less. For the past 4 years, I've watched my brother's memory be associated with failure, bankruptcy, and shame." He gestured toward the assembled crowd. "But today, I see Sterling Construction alive again. Not just the name, but the values, the commitment to building communities, treating workers with respect, and creating something that lasts beyond quarterly profit reports." Michael's eyes met those of each board member in turn. "You have the power to stop this. You can vote to remove Marcus, liquidate the partnership with Sterling Construction, and return to business as usual. But if you do, you'll be destroying something rare and precious, a chance for American business to remember its soul." The warehouse was completely silent, except for the sound of Michael's labored breathing and the distant hum of Manhattan traffic. Thomas Sterling Sr. stepped forward, his aged voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. "I built Sterling Construction in 1962 with nothing but a truck and a willingness to work 18-hour days. For 50 years, we built this city's skyline, employed hundreds of good people, and took pride in creating something lasting and beautiful." He looked directly at Marcus. "When my son died, I thought the Sterling name would be buried with him. But this young man has shown me that redemption is possible, that businesses can choose to lift people up instead of stepping on them." The old man turned to address the board members. "I've lived through recessions, market crashes, and industry changes. I've learned that the companies that survive and thrive are the ones that remember they exist to serve communities, not just shareholders." Carmen, the school worker who had spoken earlier, raised her hand tentatively. "May I say something?" Blackstone looked like he wanted to refuse, but with dozens of community members watching, he nodded curtly. "I teach 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary," Carmen said. "Every day I see children whose families are struggling because there are no good jobs in our neighborhood, no businesses that invest in our community's future." She gestured toward Emma, who was listening with rapt attention. "But this little girl has been telling everyone at school about the happy buildings her Uncle Marcus is going to build. For the first time in years, our children are talking about staying in the neighborhood when they grow up, about careers in construction and architecture and community development." Carmen's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Sterling Construction isn't just promising us a building. You're giving our children hope for a future where they can build something meaningful right here in their own community." One by one, other community members began to speak. Parents talked about job opportunities. Elderly residents shared memories of when businesses cared about neighborhoods. Young adults described their dreams of careers that would allow them to serve their community while earning a living wage. Emma had climbed down from her chair and was moving through the crowd, showing her drawings to board members who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with their role as obstacles to a child's vision of happiness. When she reached Patricia Wells, the board member who had been most vocal in opposing Marcus, Emma held up a drawing of a playground surrounded by buildings. "This is where kids will play when we're done building," Emma explained seriously. "Do you have kids, miss?" Wells looked down at the earnest little face and seemed to struggle with her response. Yes, I have grandchildren." "Would they like to play here?" Emma asked, pointing to the playground in her drawing. I suppose they would." "Then maybe you could help us build it instead of trying to stop us," Emma suggested, with the logical directness of childhood. Wells stared at the drawing for a long moment, and Marcus could see something shifting in her expression, the corporate armor beginning to crack under the assault of innocent hope. "Blackstone, Recognizing that his board's resolve was weakening, played his final card. This is all very touching, but we have fiduciary responsibilities to our shareholders. Richardson Industries exists to generate profit, not to subsidize community development projects. Marcus had been listening to the testimonies with growing certainty about what needed to happen next. Now he stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire but directed toward a very different purpose. "Richard, you're right about our responsibilities to shareholders," he said calmly. "So, let me make this simple for everyone." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a document that made Victoria gasp. "This is my resignation as CEO of Richardson Industries, effective immediately. I'm also transferring my controlling interest in the company to a trust that will be managed jointly by the board and a community advisory committee." The warehouse erupted in shocked murmurs. Even Emma looked confused by the gravity of the moment. "Uncle Marcus," she whispered, tugging on his jacket, "are you in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," he said, kneeling down to her level. "I'm just choosing what's most important." He stood and addressed the crowd. "Richardson Industries will continue to operate profitably under the board's direction, but Sterling Construction will be completely independent, funded by my personal assets and committed to the values we've discussed here today." Maria's hand found his arm. "Marcus, you don't have to give up everything." "I'm not giving up anything," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm finally choosing the right things to fight for." Blackstone stared at the resignation document as if it might burst into flames. "Marcus, you're making a mistake. Without Richardson Industries' backing, Sterling Construction will struggle to compete." "Then we'll struggle together," Thomas Brennan interrupted. "Some things are worth struggling for." The former Sterling employees nodded in agreement, their faces showing the determination of people who had already lost everything once and were prepared to risk it again for something they believed in. Emma had been processing the adult conversation with the serious concentration she brought to her most important coloring projects. Now she climbed back onto her chair and addressed the room with the clarity that had become her trademark. "I think Uncle Marcus is making the right choice," she announced. "Because Mama always says that the best families are the ones you choose, not just the ones you're born into." She pointed around the warehouse, encompassing everyone present. "We're choosing to be a family that builds happy places together, and families don't let angry people stop them from doing good things." Thomas Sterling Sr. stepped forward, his aged hands shaking slightly, as he reached for the document that would officially restart his family's company. "Mr. Richardson, Marcus, if you'll have an old man as an advisor, I'd be honored to help rebuild what my son started." "The honor would be mine, sir," Marcus replied, shaking the elderly man's hand. Michael, despite his obvious exhaustion, managed a weak smile. "David would be so proud," he whispered. "His name will be on buildings that bring joy instead of sorrow." As the reality of Marcus's decision settled over the crowd, the warehouse began to buzz with excited conversations about construction timelines, job opportunities, and community development plans. The board members found themselves increasingly irrelevant to discussions that had moved far beyond corporate approval. Patricia Wells approached Marcus, holding Emma's playground drawing. "Mr. Richardson, I want to apologize for my opposition. Watching this child's passion for building something beautiful, seeing how the community has rallied around your vision. I realize I've forgotten what business should really be about." "It's never too late to remember," Marcus replied gently. Wells looked at Emma, who was now helping elderly residents examine architectural plans with the serious attention of a seasoned consultant. Would Sterling Construction consider having Richardson Industries as a partner rather than an adversary? We could provide resources without controlling the vision." Marcus glanced at Victoria, who nodded encouragingly. I think that could work, as long as the community's interests remain the priority. As the warehouse meeting began to evolve into an impromptu celebration, Marcus found himself standing with Maria and Emma near the window overlooking the Queen's skyline. The autumn afternoon light painted everything in shades of gold and possibility. "Are you sure about this?" Maria asked quietly. "You're giving up more than just a company. You're walking away from a way of life." Marcus looked at Emma, who was animatedly explaining her building plans to anyone who would listen. He thought about the past months, the poisoning that had nearly destroyed his mind, the 4-year-old who had saved his life, the discovery of what his business practices had cost in human terms, and the gradual realization that everything he had thought mattered was actually just expensive emptiness. "I'm not walking away from anything," he said firmly. "I'm walking toward everything I never knew I wanted." Emma had overheard their conversation and came over to join them, her small hand slipping into each of theirs. "Uncle Marcus, Mama, are we going to be a real family now?" Maria's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Marcus. All the unspoken feelings, the gradual deepening of affection, the recognition that they had become essential to each other's happiness. It all came together in that moment of a child's simple question. "Emma," Marcus said, kneeling down so he could look into both their faces, "would you like it if your mama and I got married and we became a real family?" Emma's squeal of delight could be heard throughout the warehouse, causing conversations to pause as people turned to see what had caused such joy. "Is that a yes?" Maria asked, laughing through her tears. "Yes, yes, yes," Emma shouted, throwing her arms around both of them. "And we can all live together and build happy buildings and be a family forever." The warehouse erupted in applause as the community realized they were witnessing not just a business transformation, but a love story that had grown out of tragedy and blossomed into hope. Victoria approached them, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "So what happens now?" Marcus stood, keeping Emma's hand in his, while his other arm encircled Maria's waist. "Now we get to work. We have a community center to build, a company to rebuild, and a family to create." He looked around the warehouse, seeing not just the present moment, but the future they would build together. "And we proved that Emma was right all along. Love really can win." As the celebration continued around them, Marcus Richardson realized that he had finally found what his grandfather's empire building had never been able to provide. A sense of purpose that came not from conquering others, but from lifting them up. He had discovered that the greatest construction project of all was building a life filled with meaning, love, and the kind of simple happiness that a 4-year-old could draw with crayons on paper. Outside the warehouse windows, the Manhattan skyline stretched toward the horizon, a testament to ambition, power, and the relentless drive for success. But inside the converted Sterling Construction headquarters, surrounded by the laughter of children and the hopes of families, Marcus had found something far more valuable than any skyscraper. He had found home. 6 months later, the Riverside Community Center held its grand opening ceremony. The building rose from the Bronx landscape like a promise kept, beautiful, functional, and designed with the input of every family it would serve. Emma, now 5 and even more opinionated about architecture, cut the ribbon with oversized scissors while the crowd cheered. Sterling Construction had completed 12 community projects, employed 47 people at above-market wages, and established a waiting list of neighborhoods hoping to work with them. Richardson Industries, under new management but with Marcus's reformed vision, had become a partner rather than a competitor, providing resources for projects that served communities while maintaining profitable operations. Michael Sterling lived to see the first 3 buildings completed, his brother's name once again associated with pride and craftsmanship. He died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by construction photos and children's drawings of future projects. Thomas Sterling Sr. became Sterling Construction's chief advisor, his decades of experience guiding a new generation of builders who understood that their work was about more than steel and concrete. It was about creating spaces where families could flourish. And in a small apartment above the Sterling Construction offices, Marcus Richardson woke each morning to the sound of Emma practicing her reading and Maria humming while she made coffee that contained nothing more dangerous than love and hope for the future. Sometimes, late at night when Emma was asleep and Maria was reviewing the next day's construction schedules, Marcus would think about the man he used to be, the corporate raider who measured success in dollars and defeats. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone who had confused winning with living, who had built an empire but had never learned how to build a home. The transformation hadn't been easy. There were still board meetings and financial pressures, still moments when the temptation to return to ruthless efficiency whispered in his ear. But then Emma would show him her latest drawing of their happy family building beautiful things together. Jan Marcus would remember that some victories were worth more than all the corporate conquests in the world. He had learned, finally, that love really could win, not because it was stronger than greed or more powerful than ambition, but because it was the only thing that made victory worth achieving. And every morning, as he walked through the Sterling Construction warehouse, surrounded by the sounds of honest work and genuine hope, Marcus Richardson knew that he had finally built something that would last, a legacy of love that no corporate raider could ever tear down.